So we're doing the end of step 7. We're on the bottom of page 74, basically the start of 75. We'll probably read the last paragraph again at the bottom of 74 before we move into 75, and then we'll finish off with step 7 and step 8. I think I'm going to do a comparison a little bit on the prayers also at some point. I don't know, the step 3 prayer and the step 7 prayer. Okay, I'll go first. Hi, Creator. Thank you. Thank you, Creator, for this beautiful day. Thank you for the beautiful weekend that I personally had, just chilling and working and just kind of getting grounded again. Thank you, Creator, for the beautiful people that are in my life that answer my calls and give a shit about me, and thank you for the ones that are in the meetings that I get to attend and go to one special meeting and I see all the same faces a lot, and it's kind of like my family, Creator, and I thank you. Thank you for my kids, my ex-wife, my girlfriend, her kids, and just everything. I'm just really grateful today. My job and my bosses and my co-workers. Creator, I thank you for the tough experiences that you've allowed me to navigate and find lessons in. I ask that you keep those lessons to a minimum as we move forward, because hopefully I've learned most of them, because they're fucking tough. But just wish that I hope that you give me the ability to articulate emotions and thoughts today, to bring up experiences, and to be able to deliver this literature in a good way, in a sacred way that hits people's hearts and disturbs them on the question of alcoholism. Because this is all for the good, they then stand a better chance of accepting what we have to offer and doing what's hard. I thank you, Creator, for my life today. Hi.
God, thank you for the journey that this has been for me in the last year and a half, and for the people that have been around me and helping and supporting and encouraging. Oh, thank you that I can just like sit back and like actually reflect and be able to see things like that. That's a gift. And it's pretty amazing to look back, and I really noticed today that so much has gone on, and so much goes on before addiction, like through my life. And when I look back, it looks overwhelming, and I think, how did I get by? How did I get through this? And how did I get to this place? And then I know the miracle of what we're doing here and the things that go on, through you, through us, and together. Because I definitely couldn't have done it alone, and I think I couldn't do it again, but I know that I could. If I keep doing this stuff when times get tough, I think I can keep going, and I don't have that fear of trying to live a life on my own, because I don't have to be alone, and I don't have to rely on my own power, because that runs out. Thank you for being in the story, and thank you for being in the details. Amen.
Okay, let's rock and roll. Okay, so just kind of recap. So, we spent a good 4 weeks on step 6, and we're talking about the 2 bottom levels of humility. Humiliation and humbling through pain, right? And I would like you to really think about how the ego gets humiliated and what it takes for it to get humiliated, and not in the sense where it's like a detrimental term where it hurts your feelings. A factual term where we have to maybe acknowledge something, or maybe we act out in a certain way, and then we're humbled and we're humiliated because it goes against, maybe what we thought we were. Or maybe we make ourselves look like a fool amongst our fellows. Or maybe it's a deep acknowledgement of something that you thought you would kind of already passed by, or that you were further than you were. Right? So don't think of humiliation as a bad thing, right? And then the humble through pain is like, as we think about the step 3 where it talks about building with me, doing with me as thou wilt, taking away the difficulties as victory over these things may bear witness. We're kind of talking about like not doing what we've always done and trying something different, and letting go of those like ego relieving behaviors is really hard to do. And like I've said it before on the study, it's very counterculture. It goes against what many other people around us are doing. But we could easily go back and do those things. And if we do what's easy, we're acting out in self, and it'll make our life fucking hard. And like I've said it before, there's two kinds of suffering. There's the unremitting suffering of not changing. And then there's the change and the pain of the growth of doing something different. And the thing about doing something different and following this path that's really less traveled is you don't often see the benefits. And we've talked about that a lot also. You don't see the benefit right now, and it doesn't even make sense sometimes. And sometimes it's just you got to put your faith in what people are telling you and fucking do that hard thing, because I believe when Creator knows that you've really put in effort and you've let something go, then he kind of brings it back to you and gives it to you in a more pure way, right? Like I'm going to say, like, as you relinquish the need for financial security, it will leave us. It's almost like it kind of gets delivered back to you, and you don't need to fight over it. You relinquish like this defective need to always be in a relationship. And then once you've kind of given it up and you've really focused on working on yourself and finding like your own self-support through your own contributions, and you have the ability to decline outside contributions, that's when it kind of gets delivered to you. But the thing about the ego is it already has these wired ideas of how life is supposed to be, because that's deeply entrenched, and that's part of like letting go of the old ideas. So as we get into these relationships or we get into these situations, we have to always be mindful that it might be temporary again. The next relationship that you grew into, it might be one that you're going to grow out of again, so you can grow into a new one. Because the journey of healing is a journey of going through different experiences. And I believe we have sacred contracts with other people, all people that we interact with, and including our intimate relationships, where we have to learn certain lessons so we can heal those parts of us. And then we move on and we find the next level of that next human being that we're able to kind of navigate with. But we can't hold on to those things just because the idea in our head says that we have to. We have to let go and let God somehow, some way. And that sounds easy to do, but letting go and letting God is not easy to do. And then when we kind of get over that hump, we're at step 7, humility. And we read it a couple pages back. The basic ingredient of all humility, the desire to seek and do God's will. That's the definition of humility that we have, that we go for. And as we work all this like hard step 6 work, it's going to be worked in your step 10, and we'll really highlight when we get there. When you're working step 10, it's like almost exclusively step 6. A lot of it is really working a step 6, really changing and learning, continuing to watch for these defects. And then we turn, we ask God for help. We talk to someone immediately. We make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone who we can help. And then we cease fighting anything or anyone, and love and tolerance becomes our code. But just because we're reading love and tolerance becomes our code doesn't mean that that happens right away. It doesn't even probably happen for a couple, 3, 4, 5 years, where you fucking have a total change of perception, and God and you are walking hand in hand, and you're living with that perfection it talked about in step 6, raising our eyes to perfection. We're now walking with love, in love with our Creator. And then another piece of that 10 is we get placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. A lot of people will read that step 10 and the step 10 promises, and they really talk about the alcohol only. No, I don't talk about the alcohol in that step. I talk about the defective character, recoiling from it as from a hot flame. Placed in the position of neutrality within my head, my judgment of other people is like way less and it's gone in some cases. My desire for like lust is like way lowered or it's gone in some cases. My desire to like, you know, be cash register dishonest or whatever the case is like gone. Like these things go away and we don't have the turmoil anymore. And this has happened automatically, it says. So it's really the defective character that we're recoiling from, because as we do what's hard and we find the payoff way down the road, we don't want to go back there because we know that that's actually toxic or it's negative and it's not the way to live, because we have a desire to seek and do God's will, whatever that might be in that moment. So before we get going, you want to add anything?
No.
Okay.
That was a good little summary. Do you want me to read and then you can just pinch my arm?
No.
Stop, pinch my arm. Okay, so we're on the top of,
Let's do this last paragraph
okay,
once more.
so now we're on the bottom of 74. This improved perception of humility starts another revolutionary change in our outlook. Our eyes begin to open to the immense values which have become straight out of the painful ego puncturing. Until now, our lives have been largely devoted to running from pain and problems. We've fled from them like a plague. We never wanted to deal with the fact of suffering. Escape by a bottle was always our solution. Character building through suffering might be all right for saints, but it certainly didn't appeal to us. Then in AA, we looked and listened. Everywhere we saw failure and misery transformed by humility into priceless assets. We heard story after story of how humility had brought strength out of weakness. In every case, pain had been the price of admission into a new life, but this admission price had purchased more than what was expected. It brought a measure of humility, which was soon discovered to be the healer of pain. We began to fear pain less and desire humility more than ever. During the process of learning more about humility, the most profound result of all was the change in our attitude toward God. And this was true whether we had been believers or unbelievers. We began to get the idea that the higher power was a sort of bush league pinch hitter to be called upon only in an emergency. The notion that we would still save our own lives, God helping a little now and then, began to evaporate. Many of us who had thought of ourselves religious awoke to the limitations of this attitude. Refusing to place God first, we had deprived ourselves of his help. But now the words, "Of myself I am nothing, the Father doeth the work," began to carry the bright promise and meaning.
Okay, just retouching there on the bottom of 74. This improved perception of humility, as I spoke about it last week. We get a different perspective of humility. You know, that suffering might be all right for the saints, but it didn't appeal to us. And because that suffering of the change doesn't appeal to us, most people won't stay on the road of the suffering, because it's so easy to go back to the old boy-like, selfish, self-seeking, self-determined objectives. It's so easy to go back there. So when people start suffering the pain in this program, they almost always invariably go back to what's easy. And they get that immediate relief and payoff. The thing is they don't really get the real payoff, because eventually, as you go back to that broken part of yourself, because that is actually a manifestation of a broken part of yourself based in your instincts, you will drink again, because that is self and that is living in the malady. But as we take this road, us on the screen in our own lives, and we are doing what's hard, we will get an improved perception of humility. And it starts another revolutionary change in our outlook. Remember back in the We Agnostics chapter, it talks about having a profound alteration in the way of living and thinking. That's what it's talking about. We have a huge change in the way we view life, but it only comes through doing that hard work. I see many people do okay in the program, but they never get the profound alteration because they only do enough work that gets them by. That's what it was talking about in step 6. Okay, that is the step that separates the men from the boys, because they're not all in. They got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. For us, we want to be all, both feet in, and don't look fucking back, because you're not going that way. Learn from the pain, learn from the circumstances. So our eyes begin to open to the immense values which have come straight out of painful ego puncturing. So our eyes, we begin to wake up, is what it's saying. We begin to wake up in our own lives. I spent my whole life fucking sleeping in my own life. And it wasn't until I came here and I did what we're talking about here, where I actually woke up in my own life. And I'd spent 42 or 44 years sleeping in my life, being a zombie, being a sheeple, and just kind of doing what everyone else was supposed to do, right? And what I've kind of figured out here is I don't have to be like that. I don't have to live by those ideas. They weren't even mine. I just fucking inherited them unbeknownst to me, and I tried to live the best I could with those ideas. The problem is they weren't mine, and a lot of them went against the core of who I am, because they were societal fear-based beliefs that went against God within me. So as I kind of keep doing this work, and I'm ego punctured, and it's painful. And how do I get ego punctured? I get ego punctured by admission of how I am and what I'm doing and what I think like and what I think I am, and talking to other people and getting honest feedback and them puncturing my ego too. But these people that I've found in my life, and I prayed for them today, is they care about me. And they care about my well-being, and they know I'm on a spiritual path, and they are too. So they're going to tell me shit that I need to hear so I can have my ego punctured. Or I act out in the defects or the behaviors, and then I'm humbled again. And I'm ego punctured. Sometimes the best way to actually gain in humility is to, and I always say this, right? And I've said it to Janine, and I say it to all my sponsees. I'm like, you know what? At some point, don't be afraid to go live life. Once you got this going in your life pretty good, you got to go out. You got to live life. Like, I've worked with some sponsees that they got terrified to like go get into a new relationship because they'd been single and they'd been happy for a year and a half, and they're really scared because they've never done it like that before. They want to, but they're scared. Or a new job, quitting an old job that they've been at for 10 years and then going to try something new. Because as you spiritually awaken in here, you can't do some of the things that you used to do the way that you did it, because it's not you. It was based in those old self-seeking, indoctrinated beliefs that we thought we were. But now as we kind of grow into these things, so I implore people to say, you know what? Do you trust God has your fucking back? Well, you got to go out and live, and you got to experience. Go on that date. Go on that date. Go see what it's like. And oftentimes they'll come back and go, I didn't fucking like that, because it was the old systems that were driving the date to begin with, and maybe the looks and some of the shit that's not character. And then they get out there and they're like, I couldn't do it like that, or whatever the case may be. Or they got to quit their job because they're selling their soul for that job. And I've seen many people do this one, and it's a marriage that they've come in where, let's say, the woman had forced the husband into the program, and then the husband did the steps. He got spiritually awoken by a really good sponsor and through the literature and connected to their God. And he outgrew the consciousness of his partner to the point where they were incompatible. And because the initial partner who pushed the guy in there, she doesn't really understand what we're talking about. Because when you're at a lower level of consciousness, you can't really fully comprehend what an upper level of consciousness is like. You can think you can, but it's an experience, right? God's an experience. So until now, our life's been devoted to running from pain and problems. Character building through suffering might be all right for the saints, but it certainly didn't appeal to us. Well, it does appeal to us, and it will appeal to you. And it kind of talks about it in this next paragraph. This is one of my favorite paragraphs in this step. Then in AA or CA or whatever, we looked, we listened. Everywhere we saw what? Failure, humility, and misery, humility, transformed by step 6, humility, into priceless assets. We heard story after story of how humility had brought strength out of weakness. In every case, pain had been the price of admission into a new life. So the admission price into this new life is fucking pain. And as we kind of look at our fellowship and the people in our lives and meetings, we hear story after story how pain had brought, this new life. And that's kind of how it works when you're really doing it. But we also see a lot of people that get up to the podium, it's just pain, suffering, pain, suffering, pain, suffering, because they haven't heard this message that you guys are hearing today. So they think that they're doing what it is, what the program asks, but they're not. And that's okay. The book Seed of the Soul taught me that it's okay, that everyone's on their own journey and not everyone's going to wake up in this world, and that's totally fine. So what it does for me, as I maybe used to judge those people, is I understand that they're just on their own path at their own time, and that's fucking totally okay too. Right? But this admission price had purchased more than we expected. So that pain and suffering that we go through, the humiliation, we don't know what it's actually purchasing for us. It doesn't even seem like it's purchasing anything. It seems like, why the fuck am I doing this stuff like this? Why am I not getting into these relationships? Why am I turning down the big money jobs? Why am I being nice to this guy who keeps ridiculing me? Why don't I stick up for myself to the guy who's judging me and the chicks who are talking shit? Why? But it's purchasing something more than we ever expected. It brought a measure of humility, which we soon discovered to be the healer of pain. If you can have one promise in this book, and this is a step 7 promise of, it's basically a step 6 promise. If you do step 6 and you get to step 7, you can have the healing of pain. And you will begin to fear the pain less and desire humility more than ever. So to the point that I'm at today, I don't fear the pain. I don't always like the pain, but I know there's always another level up there. There's always a lesson. There's always a lesson of healing. And when we really think about, back here where it talks about we could actually have earnest religious beliefs which remain barren because we are still trying to play God ourselves. As long as we place self-reliance first, a genuine reliance upon a higher power was out of the question. So is God everything? We do the steps and we get to a certain point, and we can all probably attest to this, that I want God to be everything. Well, is God fucking everything? We always think that God is only the good. And we think that God's will is what we think is good for us. But what about what you think is bad for you? When you think about what judgments you have that need to be gone, what about the judgments that you think are good for you? Those things can be just as debilitating to your spiritual connection with God as the things that you think are bad. The only difference is you think they're good for you. And we got to really explore those. So as we begin to fear the pain less and desire humility more than ever, there's no good or no bad, because there's just as much God's will in the bad. And almost more than what's good, I find my path through what's bad. I will almost always find my next path and my next chapter in my life through what seems to be bad. So there's more God's will to me in what seems bad. But the things that we encounter in our lives that seem bad, we're going to fight. Like, I'm going to use my friend Janine for an example. When she had to leave, when her kid's dad was, wanting to take her to court and all these kinds of things, and it was really bad. But she learned some really serious lessons and really tried to lean on God. And I always say, when the fucking foundation of your life is being shaken, you will run to God. And if you're awake enough, you'll find out that he's the one doing the shaking, because he's trying to get you to do something different. So before I go, you want anything?
Maybe should.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you were just saying, the court stuff, and I didn't really understand step 7 when that was going on. That was when I first moved here. And just recently I read step 7 with a sponsee, and we went and I just was reading it, and I got emotional when I hit this part, because it meant something different now. And the way that this read to me, that paragraph that Bill was just talking about with how we look and listen. And that was how it was for me, where I, like step 6, I could see the list when I was finished, and I could look around my life and it was in shambles, and I could see the list in shambles of my life. And I knew I didn't want that. And so my motivation to turn my defects around was the pain. But Bill, like I had met Bill, and so he was kind of what I looked at. I was so cautious of what I was looking at and taking in early recovery. If it wasn't out of the book, I couldn't. It was so confusing to me. And 6 and 7 was a big confusing point where I had to be careful, because it is only 2 paragraphs, and it's interpreted in a lot of different ways in the meetings. And like I had said in previous episodes, like that I had thought that I had done AA, and now I can say that I didn't do AA, and that the pieces that I was missing was 6 and 10. And even though I had done amends to the best that I could, and a lot of good changes came from that, and even though I had good strong prayer and meditation, and I tried to be helpful, and even though I did things to the best that I could figure out, I could never figure out 6 and 7, and it wasn't until I met Bill. So like this paragraph is kind of like Bill and the people that I had a small circle, mostly through Bill, where that was what I was looking at, and I could see this be true in them. And Bill and I had shared like some similarities. Like he had what I wanted in the way that I was trying to leave a job, and I was trying to leave my material world, and there was so much going on that, but I wanted so much going on that I should have, like I remember calling you actually and saying things are okay, like maybe I should just stay put, like things are okay. And we had this conversation about like, the good is the enemy of the best, and like don't get complacent, because you don't know what's actually out there when you take a step into the direction, and your mind can justify and rationalize and make you think that this is enough, and that is my self-will, and that I'm going to end up doing the whole God is a pinch hitter thing, where I'm gonna need him again, and so why not use him right now when things are okay, to step into the unknown and really do what you're feeling like you're called to do. Because I felt that I needed to move, and I knew that it was something I'd been trying for so long. So using like Bill's experience of how this stuff worked for him, and him being able to articulate that, this is what it was like for me. And when I relinquished this parts of myself, this is what it felt like, and this is how my mind went. And this, like, he was able to tell me just what was coming up and what it felt like. And so it would come up, and, like I would say, like, what if I'm making a mistake? And he'd say like, well, there are no mistakes. And we'd talk that out, and that I had to just do something. I couldn't just sit still, because that was me like really sitting in the fire of my life, I guess, even though I wasn't burning at the moment. And so anyways, I took this plunge and went, and along the way, it was like he was saying in his opener there, that you don't know if it's working or if it's not working, because I couldn't really see. So I had to really continue to look, and like continue to get my reassurance through the people who had done this and could speak to me about that, because I would lose my faith, because it would feel like, okay, I'm never going to find a place here. And I'd start to lose hope, and then things would look like there was going to be a solution. And then I would kind of get myself all worked up, like, okay, this is gonna be good. And then it wouldn't work out, and then I'd be like, oh my God. And then these emotional ups and downs, thinking that, and like how much I was actually attaching good and bad and all these outcomes to things I had no idea about. And so by the time I did get a place, there had been some ups and downs. We talked a lot about just what he was saying, seemingly good and seemingly bad. And to me, that is how I began to fear pain less. And to, when I'm going through something bad, I don't even really, I have a hard time even saying like, how are you? Well, I don't know. I'm good, I think. But like, I don't know if it's like labeling things good or bad, because I have no idea what, like I talk about a lot, like it's a page out of a chapter out of the book. And like, I never know what paragraph I'm in my own page on my own chapter. And I don't know how the chapter's ending, and I don't know where the story's going. All I have control of is like the next line that's coming at me. And so like, I only have the control of like writing the next line. And that's where God is in the line I'm writing right now. And when I try to write the paragraph or finish the chapter, I don't have that ability and I start going all over the place. So I need to just follow the last sentence to make everything make sense. And God is in the now. So he's in the sentence right that I'm writing right now. And I started to like see that if I could do it like that, the things that were happening, the bad things were really just moving things kind of out of the way. And there was some booby traps, I think, that I was getting fearful a little bit, like I better take a job. I'm being very specific about what I want, and maybe that's selfish, maybe that's, but I was trying to attach to the thing I was going to do next. I was trying to attach the same feeling that this is what I was supposed to be doing. Like I was supposed to be moving, and I felt that. And so I was trying to find a job that matched that feeling. And I was starting to get into my head about maybe I'm being too selfish, maybe I'm being too entitled, and so I reached out to another lady in the program, and she's like, don't settle on this, have faith. And then had I deviated from some of these things, I wouldn't have ended up in the position. And so all of those experiences where something's happening and I, close the loop on it, the paragraph ends, and I can kind of look back on my book and be like, geez, like all these things that have happened that continue to show me that I'm doing something that works, even though that I don't know. And then I have more confidence to turn over the little things. So I can apply that to the littler things that I maybe would have tried to hold on to. And then I can see how overall my experience has been morphing into less reliance on my own self, to just like, I'm not trying to write so many paragraphs at a time. And I'm really just slowing down, and I'm able to stay in the sentence that I'm writing at the moment because of the things that have happened. So I see how this step has come true over time. But like that, there's still like, this is not just something that like suddenly I could be right back into some shitty thinking and need to get recentered again. But when I read this a year ago, it made no sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And part of why Janine had some trust in me is, I'll share a little story with you. So some of you know that in my previous life, before I came into recovery, I started a company when I was 24. And by the time I was like, 36, my company was making about $3 million a year. I had a house in Chestermere on an acreage called Paradise Road. My family was in good order. I was still untreated alcoholic, very angry and violent, but I was making really good money. I had 2 boats. I think I had 3 boats actually. 2 little power boats and then a little paddle boat. My wife drove an Escalade. I drove brand new Dodge trucks. We had like everything you could ever want in a material way. We pretty much had it. And then my addiction, because I live in self and I didn't know it, and I'm an addict and an alcoholic, eventually I burn it down. I burnt it down. I lost it all. And then my family was homeless, living with my old nanny, and I was homeless, and it was a pretty rough time. But there's a line in the Way Agnostics chapter that says, in the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of your human resources, this is where you find the new power, peace, sense of happiness, and direction flow into you. So in the darkness is where you find it, the sense of peace, power, direction. We're talking about God. And it says this happened soon after we wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence. I was confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence many different times. Why? Why am I here? What's the point of life? There was many times I had that. And then it said, we finally saw why we were making a heavy going of life. When I did the steps, I started to see why I made a heavy going of my own life. And it goes into the spiritual awakening. So what happened was I come into recovery and I want to get my career back and I want to make the money. That's all I fucking cared about. And then I get a year and a half in, my career starts coming back because I was really disappointed that my career wasn't coming back because I was doing some really shitty fucking jobs that I never thought I would have to do. I had to do. And there's stories behind all of these, which is why I built, why I'm why I believe this so much, because there's all these little stories based in these lines in this literature. And then I finally got my career, and I was making 80,000, then it was 130,000, and then I got poached to make be a CEO of a little corporation in Calgary that was becoming really big, and the opportunities were grand. And I'm sitting at my desk fucking one day, and I realized I didn't want to do this anymore. I had sponsored so many guys, and I had sought so much God in my life. I got to the point where I didn't want to fucking do my career anymore. And then I was really fucked, because I'm like, you got what you wanted, bro. Now what are you going to do? So I was so confused. But because I had practiced this so much, I was like, God's got me, man. I don't know what's going to happen, but God's got me. And then I drove my new car. I was driving this new Mustang that I bought. And one day at lunch, I pulled it over because I was struggling inside with this inner turmoil, right? And I prayed to my grandma, who was my higher power, and I asked her, I said, Grandma, I know that you want me to help people, and I want to help people, but I'm too afraid that I'm not going to have money, and I don't know what to do. And then she talked to me, and she said to me, Billy, it doesn't matter if you have money. That's what you do. You go help people. And then I knew, and there was no more fucking around in my mind. I made the decision right there because my God told me to do it. And it was like my grandma was speaking like right to me. And I quit my career. I gave notice and I quit my career. And then I spent the next number of months on EI praying and meditating. And then I never have done my career again. And I've never been without anything. And I've made good money, and I've made good friends, and I'm building a platform. I have my website. I'm building my social media because I have a dream, and I have this thing inside me that God says, this is what you go do. So I go do it, right? And that's how I met, like, I'm just going to, where's Julie? Like, that's how I met Julie, right? And that's how I met Janine and Audrey and Alex, right? Alex reached out to me, and she was from Manitoba. Julie reached out to me from BC. And I have people reach out to me from all over the world because this is my fucking passion. And that's my trust in God. I know he's going to take me, and he's going to supply me with the jobs. He's going to supply me with my intimate partner, with everything I fucking need somehow, some way, and he has. Right? So that takes us into this next line. This process of learning more about humility. It's a process. It's a trust. It's going through the hard shit. It's not selling yourself out for a relationship. It's fucking making that decision and leaving the relationship. It's making the decision that I made in leaving my career and going into the fucking unknown. And the unknown today is where the adventure is. Because now it's just, life's just an adventure because I don't know where the fuck I'm going or what I'm doing. But I know I'm going to be okay. So that during this process of learning more about humility, the most profound result of all was what? The change in our attitude towards God. Because God now becomes the attitude. And this was true whether we had been believers or unbelievers. We begin to get over the idea that the higher power was sort of a bush league pinch hitter. So he's not just, God is sometimes something. God is all times everything. He's the seemingly good and the seemingly bad. And like I said, I think there's more God in the bad often than there is in the good. To be called upon only in emergency, the notion that we would still live our own lives, God helping a little now and then, begin to evaporate. This is it right here. Many of us who thought ourselves religious awoke to the limitations of this attitude. Refusing to place God first, we deprived ourselves of his help. Underline that. Because when you refuse to place God first, you actually deprive yourself of his help. Now the words of myself, I am nothing, the Father doeth the work, began to carry bright promise and meaning.
I want to tell a story.
Go for it.
So it's about that phone call we had. So Bill was talking about the court stuff, and I'd just gotten up here, and like I wasn't able to see my son because his dad had him, and we were waiting till court, and I was really like getting into all the solutions that I could think that I could have and how it wasn't fair and the justified self-pity and all these things, right? But that was a really special time for me because for my recovery and for like how this literature came alive for me, because I couldn't rely on anybody to fix it. And I conversations weren't even helpful because there was nothing I could do but wait for court. I'd done everything properly that I could see. And I like shit was out of my hands to the degree that I just had to sit there and wait for court and then let things go as they would, right? So I had nobody, like no human power could have helped me there. And so, like Bill was saying, where situations drive you to God like that. And that was like literally all I had that was comfortable and comforting, was to sit by myself and pray and like listen to music. And like I was by myself for a couple of days, I think. And he phoned. I answered the phone and then I was just going on about court and this and that. And he said, "How are you?" And I thought that I was doing okay. But I started talking and then he listened for a while and then he kind of cut me off and said, like, you need to stop fucking around in fear and self-pity. And I didn't realize that I was in this self-pity. And so he brought that to my attention, and which led to this conversation about, maybe God's plan is not that you have your son. And I had a moment where I was offended. Like, what do you mean? Like, that's just such a horrible thing to say. How could you, but I didn't say anything and I just knew he was right, because it was like, maybe that is not God's plan. Maybe my plan would be that I don't have my son full time and that I do see him on visits and then I'm doing something else. But in that moment, I realized, like, if that was God's plan, I would be okay. And if that was God's plan, God wasn't going to leave me in a worse state. I wasn't going to have my son removed and then be miserable and isolated and purposeless. But if it didn't go down the way that it was, that I thought that I wanted it to be, that I was going to be okay. And I suddenly had this like faith that, I don't need to worry about it. And so I spent the next 2 days before court, like there's 2 more days I waited, and I was just more peaceful. And by the time I actually got to court, I had accepted, like my prayer was now, thank you for the outcome, whatever it is, thank you for the outcome. And so that time in my place alone, just kind of me and God and then conversations with Bill there, it really was a pivotal turning point for me. Like when I realized, like, me of my own plans, I don't need to worry about it. And that God had something, he has a design and a plan for my life. And like this is saying here, like if I start thinking I know, and like that's a pretty good like red herring, like I want my son. And if I'm fighting for that, perhaps I'm missing what should be. So it turned out that I do have my son, and we have share custody and things are good now. But if that wasn't the case, I believed in that moment that God had a plan and a design, and my faith changed. And I saw what that meant, that, like the minute I'm messing up and I'm forcing solutions, I'm missing out on what should be written if I just got out of the way. And although it seems like I'm getting what I wanted, I never know what I should have had in God's world.
And what I'll add to her story is that when I said, well, maybe God's plan isn't that you have your kid. And what I meant in that moment was, maybe you need more fucking humility. Maybe you need the groveling despair, humility. Maybe you need to learn something about the fucking pain to be more grateful or whatever. Right? And through that conversation and whatever else happened, she had a small or a big alteration in the way that she saw things. And she went to court and she was willing to not have her kid. Right? And that's what I say about, she had the internal shift of like, okay, it's up to God now. I've let it go. She wasn't grasping onto that sand and it was going through her fingers. She was like, okay, I'm going to fucking see what turns out here. And because she let it go, she actually got what she wanted, because she learned the lesson in that moment. And that's what I mean about learning our lessons in the deep subconscious, not intellectually. And then God kind of gives you what it is that you actually wanted anyway. And oftentimes it doesn't even look like how we thought it would when he gives us what we want. But in this case, it did. Okay. So.
Read.
Yeah.
We saw that we needn't always be
Bludgeoned.
yeah, and beaten into humility. It could come as much from our voluntary reaching for it as it could unremittent suffering. A great turning point in our lives came when we sought for humility as something we really wanted, rather than something we must have. It marked the time when we could commence to see the full implication of step 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. As we approach the actual taking of step 7, it might be well if AAs inquire more than just what our deeper objectives are. Each of us would like to live at peace with himself and with his fellows. We would like to be assured that the grace of God can do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. We have seen that character defects based upon short-sighted or unworthy desires are the obstacles that block our path toward these objectives. We now see clearly that we have been making unreasonable demands upon ourselves, upon others, and upon God. The chief activator in our defects has been our self-centered fear, primarily fear that we would lose something we already possessed, or we would fail to get something that we demanded. Living upon a basis of unselfish demands, we see we were in a state of continual disturbance and frustration. Therefore, no peace was to be had unless we could find a means of reducing these demands. The difference between a demand and a simple request is plain to anyone. The 7th step is where we make the change in our attitude, which permits us, with the humility as our guide, to move out of ourselves towards others and towards God. The whole emphasis of step 7 is on humility. It really is saying that we now ought to be willing to try humility as seeking the removal of our other shortcomings, just as we did when we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, and came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. If that degree of humility could enable us to find grace by which such a deadly obsession could be banished, then there must be hope of the same result respecting any other problem we could possibly have.
Okay, going back to the bottom of 75. We saw we needn't be bludgeoned and beaten into humility. We don't need to have the club of humiliation and pain to always push humility. It comes down the road though. At first, yeah, we do. It can come quite as much from our voluntary reaching for it as it can come from unremitting suffering. But you got to go through the levels first, and then it kind of turns that way. And then it talks about it here, a great turning point in our lives. So this hump, or this turning point, when we go from the 2 lower levels of humility to like a step 7 type of humility, that's the great turning point in our lives, came when we sought humility as something we really wanted, rather than something we must have. It marked the time we could commence to see the full implication of step 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And as we're at that spot, I want you to quickly flip, if you have your book, to We Agnostics' very last page, just for a second. So we're talking about like total surrender to God. The most profound result of all was the change in our attitude towards God. That's what we're talking about, okay? And to finish off that last, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. In the original manuscript, that is like the very first edition of the big book and how it works, it says humbly on our knees, holding nothing back, asking God to remove our shortcomings, okay? So when we kind of look at this last little bit of We Agnostics, bottom of 56, it talks about halfway through that bottom paragraph, the barriers he had built through the years were swept away. So Bill W is having a spiritual awakening. And remember, Bill W had a profound spiritual awakening. Most of us grow into it more slowly through the step 6 process. But Bill W did it in one big lightning bolt moment. So the barriers and the judgments and the beliefs and his defects that he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. And when we remove all those things that aren't God, we stand in the power of infinite love and ourselves, because we removed everything that's not God. He had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in constant companionship with his Creator. So remember, just back in step 7 of what we just read, the most profound result of all is the change in our attitude towards God. But we have to go through the pain and pay the price of admission into the new life. And then it happens. And then it says, thus our friend's cornerstone was fixed in place. And if you remember the We Agnostics chapter, it says, upon the simple cornerstone of God, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure could be built. Doesn't say it is built. It says it could be built. And Bill W. has it built here now. Why? Because he took God and he's turned his will and his life over to it. So he fixes the cornerstone of step 2 in place with turning it over in his step 3, but it's actually worked in the step 6 theory, okay, of really trying hard, without reservation, with willingness and honesty on all his faults, without reservation. And then it goes on to say, no later vicissitude had shaken it. Vicissitude means life's happenings. Nothing in life shook that connection, that profound connection that he has now. His alcoholic problem was taken away that very night years ago. So the first problem we come in here with the drink, it's fucking taken away. Why? Because when you learn how to actually turn it over, not theoretically and in your mind, like for real through practical application. Except for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink is never returned. At such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him, recoiling as from a hot flame. Seemingly, he could not drink, even if he would, it says. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't drink. God has restored his sanity. The sanity that God's actually restored here is he's turned his will and his life over. And the insanity is me running my life. And the only way that I find out that any decision made on my own self-will can hardly be a success, it has to come only in sobriety. I see that. And I only see that if I'm awake and I'm working a solid program and I see that any life run by me is not successful. Even the most subtle defect caused me fucking pain. But this is what I wanted to get to. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. What makes him willing to believe? Circumstances make him willing to believe. If the circumstance that I'm encountering in that moment, I'm willing to bring God in, and hopefully I am because I've done enough work and I'm conscious with God. I can bring God into that moment, and that's the miracle of healing. And then I heal that little tiny broken part of me, or maybe it's a bigger part. So it's bringing God in through that step 6 in the circumstance that creates the miracle of healing that allows you to get to the wholeness of step 7. And when you're thinking about tradition 7, everyone thinks it's about money, but it's every AA group is self-supporting, declining outside contributions. So every AA member, me and you, as we work this step 6, we're self-supporting through our own contributions of self, of God, of truth, of love, authenticity. And we can have the ability to decline outside contributions. I don't need that to make me whole because I've worked on my wholeness through the circumstances and the miracle of healing where I'm fucking good with myself. Why? Because I have a profound result of all that God's going to fucking be with me and take care of me. And I've turned it over to him numerous times over the learning of step 6. And I don't need to be bludgeoned and beaten it into it anymore because now it's my life. So he humbly offered himself to his maker. There it is. Humbly on his knees, holding nothing back, tears out of his eyes, offering himself to God, to his maker. And then then he knew. Because Bill W. surrendered so deeply, he knew what? He knew God was going to fucking take care of him and have his back. That is the level of surrender that step 7 is talking about. That level of surrender does not happen in step 3. And when you look at the step 3 prayer to the step 7 prayer, everyone thinks they're the same kind of. They're nothing alike. The step 3 prayer is an offering point. It's a starting point. And then when you look and you dissect the words in the step 7, I am now willing, God, in step 7, that you can have all of me, the good and the bad and the ugly. I now pray that you remove every single defective character that stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. It doesn't say I offer myself anymore because offer is a possibility. May I do thy will is a possibility. It says, I'm willing. As I go from here to do your bidding, boom, statement. I now work for you, God. I'm going from here and I'm doing your bidding. What does bidding mean? Bidding means I listen to you. And then it says in an overly slavish way in the dictionary, bidding definition, surrender in an overly slavish way. Well, what does slavish means? It means without original thought or idea. So we don't have a reservation anymore. We just act in love and we act for our God and we are of service. And then we just know, right? So even so, God has restored us all to our right minds. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Bill W., the spiritual awakening was sudden. Some of us, most of us, grow into it more slowly, the educational variety. But he has come to all who have honestly sought him. So we have to seek him. And when we draw near to him, he discloses himself to us. And by drawing near to him is I'm drawing near to him within myself and within my fellows. And then he discloses himself to us. Okay. I'm going to finish this off after my blabbing about step 7 against 3. Okay. Top 76. I'm going to reread a couple things that Janine touched on already. As we approach the actual taking of step 7, and step 7, like, it never ends. It's an intent within you of a desire to seek and do God's will. So as you actually come over the hump and as you approach this new profound way of living, it might be well if we AAs inquire just once more what our deeper objectives are. And these really are the deeper objectives. Each of us would like to live at peace with himself and his fellows. Yeah, man, that's what I want. We would like to be assured that the grace of God can do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Fuck yeah. We have seen that the character defects based upon short-sighted or unworthy desires are the obstacles that block our path towards these objectives. We now clearly see that we have been making unreasonable demands upon ourselves, upon others, and upon God. What I like there is he writes ourselves first, because the problem is within ourselves. And we make the unreasonable demands upon ourselves based on a lot of societal belief systems and traumas and whatever the fuck it is. And then upon others. So as my instincts drive me and I make these unreasonable demands upon myself, I'll make them on you too, and upon God. But the chief activator of the defects has been self-centered fear. So every single defect or thing that we struggle with in life, you can always boil it down to a self-centered fear. And these are the two kinds. And you can extrapolate each of these kinds, and sometimes both of them are included in acting out. Primarily fear that we will lose something that we already possessed, or fail to get something that we demanded. And usually we're trying to get something to fill the instinct, something to fucking fill that void within us somehow, some way. Or we're living in an old belief of a fear of how things should be or how I've learned that they should be. And I'm afraid that I'm going to lose that or I'm not going to get it. And this is like extrapolated widely. We can't just say it's one thing or a couple things, right? The subconscious is complex, so that is also complex. So living upon a basis of unsatisfied demands, we are in a state of continual disturbance and frustration. So like the untreated alcoholism is in our head. Continual disturbance and frustration always in here, which is what step 10 actually medicates. But it doesn't medicate it the first time you do it. It's continuing to do it. And like I said before, millimeter by millimeter, we get the result of healing if we're bringing God in the circumstance. Okay. So down a bit, 7th step, where we make the change in our attitude. Well, what's the attitude? God is the attitude. So we've changed our way of thinking and being to a God-centered way of life, which permits us with humility as our guide to move away from ourselves towards others and towards God. So it says towards others and towards God. those are the first two that we move to. And we get away from ourselves. And we move always to service to others and towards God. And through that self-sacrifice, we actually are able to produce self-care and real self-confidence. It is really saying that we ought to now try humility, desire to seek and do God's will, and the seeking of the removal of our other shortcomings. So as we have this full surrender to God, these moments, a lot of the other shit that we still suffered from, it actually just starts going away. Because you know that God is there and he's going to have your back. And sure, we're still going to have these moments because there's always going to be desires that oppose the grace of God. But once you have this shift where God is like everything, the good and the bad, a lot of your defects just go. They go. And they don't come back. Or they're a lot less likely to fuck up your life. And then it says, just as we did when we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And what I believe Bill is saying there is me running my life is the insanity, and God-centered life is sanity. And I can live in a way different way. And then it goes on to say, if that degree of humility can enable us to find the grace by which such a deadly obsession could be banished, then there must be some hope of the same respecting any other problem we could possibly have. So again, God can solve any problem. Acceptance is the answer to all of my problems today. 416 to 420 in the big book. That's kind of where it's coming from. Anyway, that's it for step 7. Okay, so we're going to 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed, became willing to make amends to them all. I think we're gonna read right through this chapter tonight and get through it all. There's certain things we can really talk about here, but in the big picture, you know, it's probably not the most profound step to be like delivering, although there's some really good shit in here and we'll get to it, but it's pretty simple. Do you want to lead it off with anything?
No, are you
Just
going to
read?
read?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Step 8. Steps 8 and 9 are concerned with personal relations. First, we take a look backwards and try to discover where we had been at fault. Next, we make rigorous attempt to repair the damage we have done. And third, having thus cleaned away the debris of the past, we consider how, with our newfound knowledge of ourselves, we may develop the best possible relations with every human being we know. This is a very large order. It is a task which many perform with increasing skill, but never really finish. Learning how to live in the greatest peace, partnership, and brotherhood with all men and women of whatever description is a moving and fascinating adventure. Every AA has found that he can make little headway in this new adventure of living until he first backtracks and really makes an accurate and unsparing survey of the human wreckage he has left in his wake. To a degree, he has already done this when taking a list of or a moral inventory, but now has come the time when he ought to redouble his efforts to see how many people he hurt and in what ways. This reopening of emotional wounds, some old, some perhaps forgotten, and some still painfully festering, will first look like a purposeless and pointless piece of surgery. But if a willing start is made, then the great advantages of doing this will so quickly reveal themselves that the pain will be lessened as one obstacle after another melts away. These obstacles, however, are very real. The first and one of the most is difficult, has to do with forgiveness. The moment we ponder a twisted or broken relationship with another person, our emotions go on the defensive. To escape looking at the wrongs we have done to another, we resentfully focus on the wrongs he has done to us. This is especially true if he has in fact behaved badly at all. Triumphantly, we seize upon his misbehavior as the perfect excuse for minimizing or forgetting our own. Right here, we need to fetch ourselves up sharply. It doesn't make much sense when a real tosspot calls a kettle black. Let's remember that alcoholics are not the only ones bedeviled by sick emotions. Moreover, it is usually a fact that our behavior when drinking has aggravated the defects of others. We repeatedly strained the patience of our best friends to a snipping point and have brought out the very worst in those who didn't think much of us to begin with. In many instances, we were really dealing with fellow sufferers, people whose woes we had increased. If we are now to ask for forgiveness for ourselves, why shouldn't we start out by forgiving them one and all?
Okay, going back to the first paragraph, halfway through. Maybe not halfway through, steps 8 and 9. So we're talking about 2 steps. And when you look at the step 8 literature, it always talks about steps 8 and 9. Concerned with personal relations. Well, all relations are personal pretty much. First, we take a look backwards and try to discover where we had been at fault. We did a lot of that in the step 4, but some of the step 4 list isn't on our step 8. You know, in the meetings we hear often people say, well, I got my step 8 list from my step 4. Well, there's a whole other piece of that list that comes not from step 4. So we'll talk about that a little further along. Next, we make a vigorous attempt to repair the damage we have done. We're kind of actually talking about step 9 there. And a lot of people, when they do the program, they'll get to the step 8 and 9 and they'll go do some amends, but they won't finish their amends. And the amends kind of go up on the back burner and they become less and less important. And then the people focus more on their defective character. But this whole program is all inclusive. All steps are as important as every other step to do in its entirety. So making all the amends, of which people will slight, why I'm saying that is to note that, so that maybe in your own life you haven't done all your amends, because amends actually have a lot of humility in them. There's a lot of groveling despair, and there's a lot of fucking humbling through pain in that process of me not wanting to do it. And then really what we find as we do these amends is the person gives us feedback and it was nothing like we thought it was. So there's more humility in there. And so we're humbled even more. Okay, and then the goal here is we may develop the best possible relations with every human being we know. There's a misconception in the program that I just care about my family. But this is about all human beings and developing the best possible relationship with everybody we know. And like even the guy at 7-Eleven, right? Maybe say hi to him in the morning, do certain things to like change how you are. Because people love a fucking hello, good morning, how are you? Right? I know when I'm at work and people come in and they're grumpy. I don't like that. I try to be upbeat and cordial in the morning and, you know, enjoy the morning and say good morning to people because it's really positive. And that's kind of what it's talking about in all aspects. Anyway, and then he reiterates that second line, next paragraph, learning how to live in the greatest peace, partnership, and brotherhood with all men and women, all of them, of whatever description, is a moving and fascinating adventure. It's about all people, all the time. A desire to seek and do God's will and packing into the stream of life is kind of what we're talking about. The principle behind step 8 is brotherly love, right? Loving your brothers and sisters out there, no matter who they are, whatever description. And for me, I've come a long way in this area because I used to be really, really prejudiced against all sorts of different aspects of people. First Nations people, Indian people, fucking white people, fucking gay people, fucking you name it, man. I was fucking prejudiced and I had nothing good to say. And I would even voice that a lot through my younger years. But today, fuck, man, I don't even give a shit. We're all the same. And that came through the program. And this is really important. Every AA has found that has found that he can make little headway in this new adventure of living until he first backtracks and really makes an accurate and unsparing survey of the human wreckage he has left in his wake. So I hear people also in meetings say, you know what, I'm not digging up all that past shit. That's all in the past. I'm just moving forward. Well, they're not going to have a new adventure in a new, beautiful way until we really look at our shortcomings and where we fucking harm people and try to make this right. And I see that actually in live action in my sponsorship life and in the life that I live in the program. quickly, next page. First little bit there. The pain will be lessened as one object after another melts away. So we're actually talking about amends and going out and doing amends, and the pain, the deep subconscious pain that we suffer, it actually is lessened little by little by little as we acknowledge these things. And I make an accurate and unsparing survey of the wreckage and the harms that I have caused. And then I go out and I make amends to people. And I can make amends to like the people I've harmed right here in arm's distance by helping people out there too. So I do it in all areas. I pack into the stream of life is what I'm doing. The next line, second sentence, I guess, the first and one of the most difficult has to do with forgiveness. The moment we ponder a twisted or broken relationship with another person, our emotions go on the defensive. So forgiveness is kind of what we're shooting for. And when I say, okay, what's this program really about? It's about developing love and forgiveness. That's really what God is. People don't really want to forgive because those resentments are really entrenched in the traumas. But I think it's really important to at least try to forgive, because you're the only one suffering. And it's your best life that you're depriving yourself of. And if God is everything, God wants fucking forgiveness. Well, my God does anyway. I don't know what your God wants, but mine wants love and forgiveness.
There was a time that I wasn't willing, and I didn't know how I was going to get willing because of this particular resentment. I felt like I had like such a small part, and that just the behavior on the other end wasn't changing, and that it was unfair, and that I was certainly not prepared or thinking that there would be any value in going and saying like, hey, you know, I'm really sorry for, and my part actually was quite big. But at the time I thought it wasn't. And to go and acknowledge that, I thought that the person was going to be like, yeah, I know, I told you, you know, and I just couldn't. I had so much like animosity and like just so much years of like what he was saying, the resentments and stuff. And so the process for me with this was that, you know, like the ideal is forgiveness, but I can't self-will the forgiveness. And so how it came to me, like today now we're fine. And like we co-parent, and, you know, like the relationships have healed in ways I could have never, ever predicted. But the process for me was like going out and doing the little ones, and then like just the rest of the steps as well, and getting the little pieces of myself back. And then the gap from here to the forgiveness, it got smaller and smaller, and the proof got bigger and bigger. And then I arrived at a place where I could see my part was what happened. Is that thing that changed is that I saw myself more accurately, and I saw the truth of the situation. And I have come to a place where like I see the value in, and that he deserved me to own my part, and that what I've had done was, you know, I was an equal player in all of this. And so all of that took time. And I did have like I did want to have forgiveness, but I didn't, you know, and I believed that if I just kept doing the rest of it all, that it would come, and it did. But it wasn't something I was able to really push myself into and just think it. And then it was that I was restored slowly through the smaller things became the bigger things, and then those things became irrelevant and healed. So if you're in a place where there's people that you don't want to forgive, I think in my experience is that as long as you just keep doing it and your eyes are set towards, you know, love, that you'll get there in spite of yourself, and you'll get there as a byproduct, I guess, of the rest of it all.
10-4, I agreed. And another component that you can do is willingly do that, even against your own will. You know, do the step 4 prayer, page 67, do what it says on page 552. In step 10, it says we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. And that's how it ends off that process in the 10. And resolutely means an admirably purposeful, determined, and unwavering manner. We turn our thoughts to someone we can help, even though sometimes it might be reluctantly. So if I'm seeking a solution that's in spiritual and altruistic in nature, even if I start the altruistic plane with resistance, doesn't matter how I start, as long as I start. Because the power of love and forgiveness will override the fucking fear and the anger. But it won't if you let the anger and the fear stay in the clutches of it. But if you keep working and chipping it away, and I can't emphasize more, millimeter by millimeter, this shit starts letting go. Okay, so if we are about to ask for forgiveness, bottom second last paragraph 78, for ourselves, why shouldn't we start out by forgiving them one and all? You know, I hear people in the program all the time, oh, I need to forgive myself. I'm going to forgive myself, or I forgive them. Like that idea that you can just forgive somebody because you fucking think you want to, that doesn't happen like that. Like Janine said, it's a process. And how I think it started for my own self-forgiveness, it probably didn't start coming till 3-4 years in. I can say that I felt better about myself somewhere in the first and second year, third year, but where the guilt and the shame and all the undealt with shit started coming up was later on. And then I started learning how to actually forgive myself and give myself a break. And the perfectionism wasn't as bad, because perfectionism's kind of a symptom of unforgiveness, in my opinion. And that shit comes down the road. So let's forgive other people. Let's try it on other people. And I can't emphasize enough, resolutely turning your thoughts to someone you can help. Praying for other people in a determined, purposeful manner for at least a minute or two at a time. Not 5 seconds, not 10 seconds, but longer periods of time. That's it.
When listing the people we had harmed, most of us had hit another solid obstacle. We got a pretty severe shock when we realized that we were preparing to make a face-to-face admission of our wretched conduct to those we had hurt. It had been embarrassing enough when we, in confidence, had admitted these things to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. But the purpose of actually visiting or even writing these people concerned now overwhelmed us, especially when we remembered in what poor favor we stood with most of them. There were cases too where we had damaged others who were still happily unaware of being hurt. Why, we cried, shouldn't bygones be bygones? Why should we have to think anything of these people at all? These were some of the ways in which fear conspired with pride to hinder our making a list of all the people we had harmed. Some of us, though, tripped over a very different snag. We clung to the claim that when we were drinking, we never hurt anybody but ourselves. Our families didn't suffer because we always paid the bills and we seldom drank at home. Our business associates didn't suffer because we were usually on the job. Our reputations hadn't suffered because we were certain few knew of our drinking. Those who did would sometimes assure us that after all, a lively bender was only a good man's fault. What real harm, therefore, had we done? No more surely than we could easily mend with a few casual apologies. This attitude, of course, is the end result of a purposeful forgetting. It is an attitude which can only be changed by a deep and honest search of our motives and actions.
Okay, not much to really talk about here, but I'm going to go to the top of 79, couple lines down. There were cases too where we had damaged others who were still happily unaware of being hurt. Why, we cried, shouldn't we let bygones be bygones? Why do we have to think of these people at all? So we may not go make an amend to somebody who doesn't know they were harmed, but like it says earlier, we have to backtrack and make an accurate and unsparing survey of the human wreckage that we left in our wake. Where did we cause harm? That's the fucking goal here. So even though you might not have to make an actual amend, it's still good to see where you harmed them. And here's the thing that people do that is totally out to lunch, and it's happened to me a few times. I'm going to say, because I'm a loud guy and I'm very forceful and whatever in the program, I've had people really seriously resent me and think a lot of negative shit about me. And then after they got to know me, they realized I'm actually a pretty fucking good guy. And then they've come and made an amend to me. Said, you know what, I really blah, 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 I owe you an amend for this, and that. And I'm like, you didn't owe me a fucking amend. You never harmed me.
But you do now.
But now you do owe me an amend, because you're actually inciting fear, bitterness, suspicion, whatever. So you don't go make an amend just because you think something. that's where you attack it on the flank and you go talk to your sponsors and pillars about how you feel. But there's no amend there. And you got to be careful, because if you go make an amend out of that deep-rooted guilt, then you'll owe an amend, because you made the mistake of voicing it to the person and they didn't deserve to even hear it. So that's one thing to be careful of.
I think too, like when I've thought that it was no big deal, or that I didn't think I had harmed them or whatever, like my subconscious knows. And so I've noticed that there's been people that come up and I'm like, oh, there they are, and then I'm not set free of the past. I'm not like, I'm doing myself I'm ripping myself off, because when I can go and face my past and face what I've done to a person, and like really just in the spirit of brotherly love and whatever, like you don't hear of these things going wrong very often. Like when they're done right, I don't hear of them going wrong. And then I believe that, that's God moving through us. This is where we feel the power of God, and we see these things go down in ways that we, like never thought were coming, that they were gonna, turn us away, or they were gonna say these things, and none of it goes down like that. And I wouldn't do that if someone I had a feeling a certain way about came to me and offered their, apologies. I would never, I'd be really gracious. So why wouldn't the other person? So I caught on kind of quickly, going back to my small town and stuff. It's like, I might think that I didn't harm them, but my subconscious knows better. And I can tell when I pass somebody in a grocery store, the gross feeling that I get, and that I don't want to make eye contact. And that is not free. That's not like happy, joyous free. That's like, I'm still having to turn my eyes down in sobriety, because I don't want to face what I've done. And then I feel like I'm in the territory of like breadcrumb sobriety.
Mm-hmm. Okay. First paragraph, end of that first paragraph on 79. These were some of the ways in which fear conspired with pride to hinder our making of a list of all people we have harmed. So as we're making this list, maybe in your first set of steps, you're going to come up with your list, and maybe there's people you think about that don't make the list. Maybe it's fear conspiring with pride to hinder the making of putting these people on that list. And that's totally fine. The thing that will happen as you grow in your recovery and you really seek a desire to seek and do God's will, these names are going to pop into your mind, and you're going to run into these people at the grocery store or whatever, and you're going to have a chance to put them on your list or make that amendment at that moment. So the important thing is to not worry too much about it on your first round. And as the years go on, you will develop a capacity to have intuitive thoughts of people you have harmed based on different situations. Why? Because you have a desire to seek and do God's will, and God knows that you want to heal, and he's going to bring these things to the surface when they need to be brought up.
One of the examples, I was back in my hometown and I needed to get a little tattoo corrected, and I phoned the studio, and it's this tattoo artist, and I was like, oh my God, got the feeling. And I was like, oh. And then I like remembered suddenly that this night, and I was like yelling, and it was like probably, close to 20 years ago. And so it was bothering me, and I called him back, and I booked the appointment, and I'm like, hey, this is who this is. This is like, I kind of described the event and how I would know, and he was friends with my brother. And he was like, oh, hey, he's like, yeah, come on into the appointment, bring coolers. I was like, oh no, I don't drink anymore. And I went to the appointment and just had a really awesome talk about recovery, and I was leaving, and he said, thanks so much for coming. And he was just so grateful. And he said, you changed my mind about some things. We talked about a bit about AA and what the experience was. So it was an opportunity to not only like set myself free from that gross feeling, but to carry the message to, people who potentially are still suffering. And so it turned out to be a really good experience. And that was one where I'm like, oof, the subconscious is going to let me know anyways.
And 4. Okay. Let's keep going.
Mm-hmm.
So this next paragraph, the 2 next paragraphs are really deep. They kind of are out of place from the regular thinking of step 8. So really pay attention to these 2 paragraphs, and we'll try to really highlight what they're saying.
What are we on?
Though in some cases we cannot
Okay.
make restitution.
Though in some cases we cannot make restitution at all, and in some cases action ought to be deferred. We should nevertheless make an accurate and really exhaustive survey of our past life as it has affected other people. In many instances, we shall find that though no harm was done, others has not been great, the emotional harm we have done to ourselves has. Very deep, sometimes quite forgotten, damaging emotional conflicts persist at below the level of consciousness. At the time of these occurrences, they may actually have given our emotions violent twists, which we have since discolored our personalities and altered our lives for the worse. While the purpose of making restitution to others is paramount, it is equally necessary that we extricate from an examination of our personal relations every bit of information about ourselves and our fundamental difficulties that we can. Since defective relations with other human beings have nearly always been the immediate cause of our woes, including our alcoholism, no field of investigation could yield more satisfying and valuable results than this one. Calm, thoughtful reflection upon personal relations can deepen our insight. We can go far beyond these things which have superficially wronged with us to see the flaws which were basic, flaws which sometimes were responsible for a whole pattern of our lives. Thoroughness, we have found, will pay, and will pay handsomely.
Okay, so back to bottom 79. Though in some cases we cannot make restitution at all. So I'm not able to make an amend. In certain circumstances, certain situations of amends, I can't make the amend, it says. And in other cases, action ought to be deferred. So maybe it doesn't happen right now and I defer it to down the road. Or maybe I don't even do the amend that I think I need to do and I defer it into another way of making the amend, i.e. a letter, i.e. a donation to an organization of maybe women that I heard, or a group of people that I really ridiculed my whole life. Like, there's ways that we can defer these, and that's always at the directive of the sponsor, okay? And so when we talk about making the list of amends and becoming willing to make amends to them all, it doesn't mean that we're always going to make a direct amend to whoever's on that list. The sponsor would be me in this case. I'll guide you to how you're going to make the amend with each person based on my experience and the literature and what it says and how this should be done and if you could harm them or others more. Sometimes I'm going to get you to write a letter. Sometimes I'm going to get you to write a letter in a prayer. Sometimes I'm going to send you to the mountains to read this letter in the prayer and burn it or rip it up and put it in the river. Sometimes you will do the direct amend. Sometimes you're going to wait for 2 or 3 years or maybe 5 years, depending on what it all is. And that's all at the direction of the sponsor, okay? Maybe it's donation, maybe it's whatever it is. But we should nevertheless, this is important, make an accurate and really exhaustive survey of our past life as it has affected other people. And a lot of this can be done when you're doing your step 5. So when I do a step 5, I make an accurate and exhaustive survey of this person's whole past life. In many instances, we shall find that the harm done to others has not been great. The emotional harm we have done ourselves has been. So sometimes when we act out in certain ways, we might not actually have affected a lot of people real negatively, but because maybe we're selling out a piece of our soul to avoid the conflict, or maybe we don't have the voice to speak up in the areas where we really need to speak up, or maybe people put us down and we're just fucking taking it our whole life. What happens is very deep, sometimes quite forgotten, damaging emotional conflicts persist below the level of my own consciousness. At the time of these occurrences, as these things are happening down the line of my life, they may have actually given my emotions violent twists, which have since discolored our personalities and altered our lives for the worse. So this is like really deep-rooted stuff we're talking about. This stuff is the kind of stuff that happens in childhood, or, you know, maybe little girls with fucking, you know, abusive people taking advantage of them and fucking not saying things. And same with boys, and, you know, bullies on the playground and bullies at home and abusive parents that the kids are watching. Like, this could be a numerous amount of different things that can affect this. and discolor your life and alter your life for the worse. So we got to fucking sometimes look at that. And that is, the subconscious doesn't want to see that sometimes. And what I will recommend is not going and digging into that deep subconscious just because you're hearing this. Through the process of working these steps over and over and over years, this shit will reveal itself. It's going to come up. And you'll know intuitively it's time to deal with it. But the thing is if you don't keep a good program and you're not working a solid, full, well-rounded, balanced program, you won't deal with this shit because you won't be able to, because you're not running a decent program. So you're not dealing with the shit when the shit comes up. And if you don't deal with the shit when the shit comes up organically, the shit will fucking deal with you. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about right here that comes up in your 4th year, 5th year, 6th year, 7th year. But if you haven't been running a good program, this shit's going to come up and it's going to really fuck with you. And that's the importance of staying sober, building sober patterns, learning how to use God and other spiritual disciplines and throwing shit at the wall and changing it up over time, where you learn how to allow this shit to come up. Okay. While the purpose of making restitution to others, so again, the amends is really important to do to others. It's paramount, actually. It is equally necessary that we extricate from an examination of our personal relations every bit of information about ourselves and our fundamental difficulties that we can. So, okay, the process of making restitution and amends to others is paramount. It's just as paramount for me to look at myself and examine all of my personal relations and try to gain all the data through those relationships about myself and where some of the fundamental difficulties come from. A lot of these relationships will be with your family. Mm-hmm. That's where the fundamental difficulties often start, but not always. So it's just important to make an accurate and exhaustive survey of your past life and look at all relationships. When I do a step 5, I actually bring all the step 8 stuff into the 5 because it makes the 5 way more effective. Since defective relations with other human beings has nearly always been the immediate cause of our woes, including our alcoholism, no field of investigation could yield more satisfying and valuable rewards than this one. Calm, thoughtful reflection upon personal relations can deepen our insight. We can go far beyond those things which were superficially wrong with us. The fucking branches, the shit that we can see. To see those flaws which were basic, flaws which were sometimes responsible for the whole pattern of our lives. So when we did step 6, we read the step 4 and we talked about the instincts. The instincts get broken, and that's where the problems arise from, and that's what it's talking about. As I act out in all these defective characters, I'm trying to fill the voids and the insecurities and the emotional needs that I never got in my life somehow. Or maybe I'm protecting myself from traumas happening again, right? So I can go far beyond these things which are superficially wrong with me to see the flaws which were basic, flaws which are sometimes responsible for the whole pattern of my life. And some of these things come in, the one that comes to mind right now is the vanity, where men and women will both overcompensate in how they look and what they wear and what they drive. And they're fully obsessed on these things because of things and how they grew up and what they've seen and how society has kind of groomed us.
So the example that I think of for myself when I read this is just like as a child, I just was living with my one parent, and that parent was in a lot of relationships, and those relationships failed, and I moved out early, and I had this idea that I will never put myself in a position to depend on anybody because I never wanted that. I saw like 4 marriages collapse growing up before I moved out, and I moved out because the stepmom was crazy. And I remember the moment that I decided, I'm like, I will never let this happen. And so I set in motion this life where I was so ridiculously like self-reliant and independent and like just an immense like drive, which I mean, it caused my career, it caused some things, but it also caused some major damages. And I would say that I maybe I would have done those things anyways, but I had a lot of wreckage just based on my self-reliance. And it was the thing that was super glaring that I didn't really understand. And so to pick it apart and to see it like this, and to go back into childhood and see, you know, the ways that those things kind of just twisted my character beyond like what, so it wasn't a superficial flaw. It was like, it became who I am. I am this independent person. I am self-reliant. Nobody is going to disappoint me, and I will do anything to put myself in a position of me running my own show. And that was that. And so that was who I am. And as I have been in recovery and you know, working this program, that is not who I am. And that is not my character by a long shot. And it's actually pretty sad. Like there was some grieving, you know, there was a period of like the things that I, you know, lost and let go of and didn't have because of the fear and because of a drive in a direction that was like this, you know. I thought it was who I was. And so that's kind of, you know, an example that I can give to give it some context.
Okay, and top of page 80, you know, these emotional conflicts that were persisting below the level of your consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the time of these occurrences, when you developed these emotional deformities, you didn't know how, when, and where, but we can look back and find that out, right? They may have actually given your emotions violent twists, which has since discolored your personality and altered your life for the worse, ultimately.
Well, and because I was going in that direction, so then I wouldn't really rely on people. And then so I wouldn't have a true partnership with anybody. The relationship would fail, which would then confirm to me that people are unreliable. People are going to hurt me. Then I go out and be more independent, try to get into relationship because my character isn't, I am supposed to be alone in isolation in my life. That is not who God intended me to be. So I keep pushing that, trying to get into a relationship because that's my God-given instinct. That relationship fails, perpetuate, and it just it becomes me and my character and what I know. And so it's so deep.
So if we were to go back and ask you if you thought these were like really good ideas for your future, you would be standing firm and like, this is a great part of my personality.
I was proud of it for a long time.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I said earlier, like looking at the things that we think are good for us and how much they can block God too, like that's a perfect example. And we have those even still today, even with our recovery.
Yeah.
Right. But that's kind of like a perfect example of what I was talking about. Okay. Thoroughness we found and will pay and pay handsomely. And the thoroughness will pay and it will pay handsomely, but it's fucking painful. Again, right? Pain is there again. More humility and more growth. So let's just take it right to the end.
We might next ask ourselves what we mean when we say that we have harmed other people. What kinds of harm do people do to one another anyway? To define the word harmed in a practical way, we might call it the result of instincts in collision, which cause physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual damage to people. If our tempers are consistently bad, we arouse anger in others. If we lie or we cheat, we deprive others not only of their worldly goods, but of their emotional security and their peace of mind. We really issue them an invitation to become contemptuous and vengeful. If our sex conduct is selfish, we may exile jealousy, misery, and a strong desire to retaliate in kind. Such gross misbehavior is not by any means the full catalog of the harms we do. Let us think of some of the subtler ones which can be quite as damaging. Suppose that in our family lives we happen to live or to be miserably, irresponsible, callous, or cold. Suppose that we are irritable, critical, impatient, and humorless. Suppose we lavish attention upon one member of the family and neglect the other. What happens when we try to dominate the whole family, either by rule of iron or by a constant outpouring of minute decisions for just how their lives should be, lived from 1 hour to the hour? What happens when we wallow in depression and self-pity oozing from every pore and inflict that upon those about us? Such a roster of harms done to others, the kind that make daily living with us as practicing alcoholics difficult and often unbearable, could be extended almost indefinitely. When we take such a personality traits as those into shop, office, and society of our fellows, they can damage almost every as extensive as that we have caused at home. Having carefully surveyed this whole area of human relations and having decided exactly what personality traits have in us injured and disturbed others, we can now commence to ransack memory for the people whom we have had offense. To put a finger on those nearby and most deeply damaged ones shouldn't be hard to do. Then, as year by year we walk back through our lives as far as our memory will reach, we are bound to construct a long list of people who we have to some extent or another been affected. We should, of course, ponder and weigh each instance carefully. We shall want to hold ourselves, of course, admitting to the things we had done, meanwhile forgiving the wrongs done to us, real or fancied. We should avoid extreme judgment, both of ourselves and of others involved. We must not exaggerate our defects or theirs. A quiet, objective view will be our steadfast aim. Whenever our pencil falters, we can fortify and cheer ourselves by remembering what AA experience in this step has meant to others. It is the beginning of the end of isolation from our fellows and from God.
Okay, so bottom of 80, halfway through that bottom paragraph, to define the word harm. This is important in a practical way. We might call it the result of instincts in collision, which cause 4 different kinds: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual damage to people. When you think of the person on your step 8 list, you got to think of those 4 aspects. You know, a lot of times we'll just think of like how we hurt them physically or maybe a little bit mentally. But the emotional conflict could be very deep, and maybe we hurt them spiritually also. So again, over on this other page, it says ponder and weigh each instance carefully. That's really an important sentence, to ponder and weigh each relationship as you walk back through your life, and try to look at, let's say it's my mom. I'm going to remember my mom. I'm going to go back to like when I was a kid, and I'm going to remember, and I'm going to ponder and weigh each instance of my memories carefully to see how I hurt her emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And fuck, I did a lot of harm to my mom right from when I was a fucking kid. And if I really think about some of those things that I did, and I can look at some of like my anger issues later, I can see reasons why I became angry later. So those other paragraphs that we were talking about with the deeper shit in it, those things kind of come to fruition as we're pondering and weighing these instances carefully. And I can see things that I never would have seen because I'm working with God here. And I have, you know, a willingness to explore myself. Although me admitting some of these things that I might have done or the harms I caused, it's very humiliating to me now as I have a bit of character. And I have to go and go, holy fuck, I was a real piece of shit to my mom or whatever. Right? And sometimes we don't even want to admit some of the shit that we have done. But it's important that we do so that we can be free of it. Okay, next page 81. I'm not going to go through these, but it's a really good idea that you go through this whole big paragraph and really look at your life and see which ones fit you, right? Like one that fit me was a rule of an iron by constant outpouring of minute-by-minute directions of how their life should be lived hour to hour. I did that with my kids to some degree, a large degree, and to my ex-wife, right? And there's a couple of them here that really kind of I can relate to, and I can probably expand, and a couple little writings on a piece of paper can probably spiderweb into a whole bunch of shit. And if I do that properly, I can probably get down more to the root of it and fucking free myself some more. And so I'll finish with this on the bottom paragraph. To put a finger on the nearby and most deeply damaged one shouldn't be too hard to do. Then as year by year, we walk back through our lives as far as memory will reach. That's important. Sitting down, walking back through your life as far as memory will reach, remembering each person on your journey on that list, trying to ponder and weigh each instant carefully. We shall be bound to construct a long list of people to some extent or another have been affected. We should, of course, ponder and weigh each instance carefully. And then on the last page, We should avoid extreme judgments of both ourselves, because we can go into like a rabbit hole of guilt and shame and self right there on the spot, or of others into resentment. We must not exaggerate our defects or theirs. A quiet, objective view will be the steadfast aim. And that's it. Anything else?
I guess I'll just finish my thoughts with I think this step actually prepared me for like the relationships that I have in my life that are important and meaningful. I learned from this step that I'm often wrong. Like when I wrote how I harmed people and went into the amends, and I'm asking, is there anything else? And then they're telling me these things that wasn't how I thought that I harmed them, and that was in more cases than it wasn't. That there was these other things that, like the things that I were saying, they mattered, but not really. And there was things like my daughter came back at me with some things that just didn't even make my list or my thoughts at all. And so like now in my relationships today, like even today, I had a friend talk to me about like just some of our interactions and how I was hurtful in an interaction. And it's like, these are things that I need to be prepared for, because I can't always see how I'm hurting people. And I need to be able to be at a place that when they give me the feedback, that I can take it. And this from what I can see was the first, of my practice points where I've had to hear a lot about how I've harmed people and not in the ways that I had thought. And so now I feel like I'm able to take, like you pissed me off in this way, you hurt me in this way. And instead of getting defensive, or if I do feel it a little bit, I'm able to just take it without reacting and have a really constructive conversation. And then as a result, I end up with these stronger, more meaningful friendships, because like conflict comes up and like you spend time in close proximity with people and you're having interactions all the time. Like if you're not really, stepping on toes in some way, I feel like somebody's not actually speaking up, because that's what people do. And so it's setting the groundwork to be able to just have honest conversations, and then say, oh, and then you just okay, and then I'm aware of it, and then you keep going. And my friendships are honest and they're kind of easy to navigate, and when things come up, it's like you address them, and then as a result of the conflict, you get a more deeper friendship. So it's I don't know, for me it was like the first part of doing that and having these really good reciprocated friendships with people was in this 8 and 9, where I was learning how to mend the relationships, but also have the people skills that allowed me to keep the relationships in recovery healthy and thriving.
Mm-hmm. And what I'll add to that is the reason why we're highlighting, like really looking at past relationships and humbling yourself with the wrongs you've done, because we really need that humility to go make the amend, because we don't want to be that anymore. And if I just make a list and I don't really look at the harms I've done, I'll go make the amend and fucking I'm not really humbled enough, and I'm probably not going to change. So it's really important to go into the amend armed with the facts about yourself, that you don't want to be like that anymore. And when I do a 5, like I said, I bring this 8 stuff in and I humble them way back in the 5, so that the 6 and the 7 mean something and the 8 and the 9 mean something. And that just comes over sponsorship time. But yeah, that's it. Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming out.